Hello, and thank you for joining me here this afternoon when we're going to talk a little bit more about Chinese medicine and acupuncture and how that relates to autoimmune disorders, which is our topic of the month. Um, yeah, this is a subject that's sort of near and dear to my heart. But anyway, it's one of those things that comes up frequently in my clinic. And really, it's just it's one of the things that inspired me to study Chinese medicine in the first place. And I'll get into that later, just a little bit. But anyway, I'm Dr. Beth Walker Graham, and I'm an acupuncturist and a Chinese medical herbalist here at Elemental Wellness. Um, and I'm going to dive right into just a little bit about what the words autoimmune disease are really talking about. And so, auto meaning self, immune meaning relating to the immune system. And so, um, on the surface, of course, this is all very simple, right? A dysfunction is, of course, an abnormality or some kind of impaired function. This simple explanation is it's the body mounting an immune response to itself. And unfortunately, that right there is the end of simple because that all by itself is a fairly serious malfunction of your immune system. Um, so I'm going to cover a little bit of vocabulary here just so we kind of know what we're talking about. I've gotten some definitions up on the screen there about antibodies and lymphocytes. I think HLA is probably the most complicated term up there, human leukocyte antigens. But again, these are some of those things that are helping your body not attack itself, that are part of the things that can go awry when you look at an immune system that's not functioning properly. So I'm not going to get into the most of the nitty gritty on that today, just because we really don't have time. The immune system is a complex organism, really. It's its own special organized system of metabolic function. And we can dive into that if you guys are interested in a deep dive. I'm happy to walk that route with you. But today is just a short lecture, a little taster, if you will, of how we look at the immune system and autoimmune diseases in specific. So, anyway, the reason it's a serious malfunction of your immune system is because there are so many checkpoints along the way of a developing immune cell that and these checkpoints are specifically designed to eliminate what they call self-reactivity, which is essentially what autoimmune disease is. It's a self-reactivity, right? We talked already. It's an immune response that you mount to yourself, right? That autoimmune disease should be way rarer than it is. In fact, based on one study I read, it was up to 10% of the control or of the sample group that was tested. Up to 10% of people were affected by autoimmune disease, and so that's not a small number. So anyway, it should be rarer than it is, and it also is part of what makes it really difficult to treat from a Western perspective because there's so many little places along the way where things could go wrong. It's difficult to know where to focus your treatment, and so that's one of the reasons why we find it difficult to treat from a Western perspective. And there's a lot of specificity in the type of immune reaction. So your body has multiple types of immune reactions that it will launch, and they all involve the types of things that I've mentioned up here in our little vocab lesson, right? They all involve antibodies, lymphocytes, complement cytokines, those kinds of things. But but they have different kinds and they cause a variety of symptoms, and that's the other thing. So a lot of Western medicine is very symptom driven, where we say, oh, we want to treat this symptom, but there are so many symptoms because the system itself is so complex. So right now, Western medical treatment really has limited things to offer. You can have basically an on switch or an off switch, and that's going to broadly trigger the immune response or suppress it. And they are getting more specific about that, about how we trigger an immune response. You'll see that in our technology that we're learning in terms of vaccines and things like that. We are getting more specific. But in terms of suppressing it or reducing an immune response, yeah, this is kind of it. For those of you who are curious, this is actually the molecular structure of prednisone. So, um, but you know, this is what we got. and different variations of this, perhaps, of course. But and I think that there are other things in the loop, but you'll find that that's more often than not what you get to. We can give you pain relief. We can give you, we can, give you exercises to do, or we can give you steroids, and that's what you got. And we don't really know from a Western medicine perspective what causes the abnormal immune responses that are responsible for autoimmune disease, but we do know that they tend to co-occur, i.e., if you have one, you may very likely develop a second or a third, depending on the tissues that are involved, but particularly with diseases associated with soft tissues and the endocrine system. We also know that women are twice as likely to develop autoimmune disorder as men. So, anecdotally, I suspect that this may be related to our cyclical hormone profiles, as many women in my practice have been diagnosed with autoimmune diseases after pregnancy or menopause. And those are the times, of course, in the body where we see large shifts in hormone profiles. Current research is indicating that some of the causes that may be happening are a combination of genetics, environmental factors like oxidative stress and exposure to irritants like mold or heavy metals, something that's called molecular mimicry, but that's essentially like a mistaken identity, right? Where one molecule looks similarly enough that, like, the antigen and the molecule receptors, they kind of fit. And so you get one cell being attacked when really that battle was not meant for it. And then also you'll get sometimes chronic or latent viral infection is implicated in some of the studies that we have. And that's where a virus that your body has in it that it's managing. And this is very common with viral illnesses. People don't often know this, but many viral illnesses, you have them, you're sick, you clear them, but they're not necessarily gone. Chickenpox is a great example of that, where you get chickenpox, you only really get it once, most cases, right? But it doesn't ever go away. You sort of always have, like, the pieces of that in your body, so that, like, that's how shingles happens, for instance, right? Shingles is a resurgence of that, and almost all herpes viruses are like this. You can't ever actually get rid of them. You can only really manage them. And the good news is your immune system is usually really, really good at keeping those viruses at bay. But as we'll learn a little bit later, when it comes to, how we're stressing our bodies and our immune systems, sometimes it's just, it's the thing that, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. It's one thing too many. And so, if there's a latent infection your body's managing but not clearing, and it keeps your immune system at a state of constant vigilance, right, that can be a problem. The EBV virus, Epstein-Barr virus, which is the one also responsible for mononucleosis or glandular fever, I think, as we know it in the UK. And EBV is a herpes type virus, right? And it can remain latent in the body. And we think that this might have something to do with how we get MS, right? So this other diagram is showing you how the antigens might attack one of these other three structures in the body. So you've got gluten, casein, and thyroid tissue. And you can see here that that antigen kind of fits each one of those things. And the antigens are really smart. I mean, it's not that your immune system isn't smart, it's just not quite detailed enough, which it needs to be broad enough that it can manage all of the incoming, onslaughts that your immune system gets every day when you walk out into the world and you're, exposed to all kinds of viruses and bacteria. But sometimes it's just not specific enough. And this is how we begin to see what that self-reactivity looks like. So I was really inspired by this quote. You're all thinking now, well, that's great, Beth, right? Not a very pretty picture, or someone myself or someone I love is really suffering right now. What can I do, right? And I'm so glad you asked that question, because I actually started my learning journey because I wanted to know more about how our bodies worked, and more specifically, how autoimmune diseases work, because I have one, and so does my mom and all of her sisters, and probably many of my other female relatives. So, oh, and I have babies, babies, which I very quickly realized were at a higher risk of acquiring an autoimmune disorder simply because of me and my family history. I had already figured out that Western medicine had very little to offer in the way of treatment or prevention, really. And so I knew I wanted to go the holistic route when I was studying. And then I discovered Chinese medicine. And I really felt like its elegant diagnostic structure would be perfect for helping me figure out how this whole autoimmune thing worked. So, this was a great quote at the beginning of one of my autoimmune textbooks. Chinese medicine, with its strong theoretical foundation and its great adaptability and its focus on treating the individual as a whole, is ideally suited over the long term to reducing overall intensity of the disease, prolonging remission periods, and improving the patient's general quality of life. And I feel like, if that isn't a salve to that not so happy picture that I just painted for you, I'm not really sure what is. I don't know that we can ask for more than that. And I'm always surprised, pleasantly, and pleased with what Chinese medicine has to offer us on some of these really complicated health pictures. And it's not necessarily that the Chinese medicine itself is complex. It's just, like I said, it's really elegant. So. Next up, we're going to talk about what is so special about Chinese medicine when it comes to autoimmune diseases specifically. So, mostly what I think is special about it is that it just kind of gets the immune system. I mean, we talked a little bit about how complicated the immune system is from a Western perspective, and truly there are diagrams upon diagrams, multiple organs in your body, dozens of different cellular types and chemical compounds, all circulating through your body and your organs in different ways, and they all respond differently. Antibodies, natural killer cells, antigens, all this stuff, right? We've got lots of components in Western medicine. And in Chinese medicine, like there's some, connections here. There's a few things we're going to talk about, but ultimately it's just sort of like, oh yeah, it gets it. It really makes sense. And I feel like all those causes that I was talking about earlier, right, that Western medicine sort of suspects might be causative, right? Like all these things that we think Western medicine might be getting close to understanding. Chinese medicine has an explanation for all of that. So, in Chinese medicine, the concept of your prevention immunity, your immune system is mian yi. So that's what you see here. So, in TCM, we understand that immunity is just a biological response to an invading organism, just like in Western medicine. But we also have these concepts called zhengqi, which is the body's ability to avoid illness and maintain a state of health, and Wei Qi, which is the body's ability to ward off external pathogens. So one of the many tools we have in Chinese medicine is herbalism, and there are several studies that show a connection between some of our common herbal substances like renshen or ginseng, huang tri, which you might know as astragalus, and dangshen, which you might know as cotinopsis, and how they enhance immunocompetence, right? The competence of your immune system. So we just call them qi tonics, right? Because qi is how we describe function in TCM. On that note, another thing that TCM and Western medicine have in common, they place the spleen as an immune organ. It's actually one of the few crossover functions that the biomedical spleen and the TCM spleen have in common. In biomed, the spleen is a lymphoid organ, i.e. it stores lymphocytes and makes antibodies and is therefore part of the immune system. And in TCM, things like digestion and energy are all the domain of the spleen. So I associate the spleen with things like fatigue and leaky gut, and those are all very common among autoimmune disease sufferers. And we also have an explanation for the DNA component, right, in the kidney, which is convenient because other common symptoms of autoimmune disorder are inflammation, low-grade fever, and a rapid heart rate, all of which fall under the category of kidney insufficiency. So keeping the yin-yang balance is a really important part of treating autoimmune disease when we're using TCM, and both of these substances are governed by the kidney. Lastly, TCM has this concept of B, which I think is a really beautiful explanation, not only for what we use it for most frequently, which is treating arthritis and other types of painful joint inflammation, but also for explaining that sort of latent virus component that we suspect has a relationship to autoimmune disease. Side note, there are 70 different types of B, which should tell you a lot about how specific we can get in diagnosing and treating joint issues in Chinese medicine. So, um, when I look at the Zheng Qi and the Wei Qi, I really see Wei Qi as a combination of your innate and acquired cellular immunity, because the innate immunity, of course, is what's always there, what you're kind of born with, and those are usually your first line defenses, right? Which is how I really picture your Wei Qi. But also the acquired part of your immune system, right? It's the memory part of your immune system, and that's something that your body, learns and generates and produces within the normal course of its business fighting, external pathogens. So years ago in one of my internal med classes, we were discussing asthma, which is often an early sign of immune dysfunction, particularly in children. So anyway, my professor said, asthma requires the presence of old phlegm in the body. And to me, like the implication being then that there was also a trigger that sets it off. But this really always reminded me of how antibodies are likely just one classification of phlegm according to Chinese medicine. You see it coming up when we talk about things like pus, or like sores that are kind of weepy and oozy, right? In a Western sense, like we understand that pus actually is full of white blood cells, right? White blood cells have antibodies. So, there's that aspect to it, but I see phlegm in the body. That's antibodies, and so an autoimmune disorder will always have a phlegm component. um, the Zheng Qi is responsible for both maintaining and producing the Wei Qi, but also the nutritive Qi, which is what nourishes the organs, and it's closely linked to the blood. So this is something that I think is well supported with acupuncture and herbal therapy, but definitely acupuncture, right? When we're looking at working with your Zheng Qi or your Wei Qi, acupuncture is a Qi tool. So if we need to move it, if we need to strengthen it, support it, acupuncture is great for that. And it's also something that you can protect yourself. So, doing things like resting at the first sign of illness or avoiding things like sugar, dressing appropriately for the weather. That's also, you've heard me tell this story before where, when you start Chinese medicine school, you're all about wearing your tank tops and whatever when you're living in California, of course. But by the time you're ending Chinese medicine school, everybody is wearing a scarf, even in, really hot weather, because we all know we have to protect that back of our neck as a way of protecting our bodies from invading wind and supporting our Wei Qi while it does its job, right? And then anything that you do to support your spleen Qi will also support your Zheng Qi and your Wei Qi. So, because I already said the Qi or the spleen is the Qi maker, among other things, of your body. And, in Chinese medicine, the spleen and the liver generally respond really quickly to acupuncture and herbal therapy. One of my colleagues used the term acu-nap, and I've definitely co-opted this phrase, and I use it frequently with my patients. The type of energy restoration that happens on the acupuncture table can be truly remarkable. We also generally suggest short-term dietary guidelines until the spleen is restored to health. So remember how I said there were like a lot of checkpoints in the body to prevent self-reactivity in the immune system? Most of those happen in lymphoid tissue. And so getting your spleen back in shape is crucial to restoring the function of those immune system checkpoints. And another point about the spleen that I think is important to mention is that its job is to transform damp and phlegm. One of the reasons that I suspect that TCM recommends avoiding wheat when your spleen is weak is because of the zonulin, which can cause inflammation of the intestinal lining and also allow things into your bloodstream that maybe don't belong there, and will just increase the prevalence of dampness or antibodies in your body. So even if you don't have celiac disease, avoiding wheat for a period of time might be an easy first step to helping you with spleen issues. And some of the symptoms of spleen issues are fatigue, bruising, muscle aches, anxiety, damp accumulation. And we see these a lot in autoimmune disorders. So this all tracks for me as an acupuncturist. Um, the kidneys always take longer to heal because they are so foundational and are really the source and the last line of defense that your body has against chronic illness and fatigue. And one of the principles we use to fight the yin deficiency heat signs that come with autoimmune disorder is to tonify the water element, and the kidneys are associated with that water element. So we work with the kidney system a lot, not only in treating autoimmune disorders, but in regulating hormones, particularly during peri and postmenopausal times. And I find that a proper herbal tonic is really crucial in healing and repairing damage to the system. And you'll see here too, some of the symptoms of kidney, deficiency are dryness or heat, which we would associate with yin deficiency. Um, the kidney is associated with your pre-heaven essence or your genetics. That's sort of like how we say genetics in Chinese medicine. Joint pain, right, could be attributed to the kidney's inability to produce marrow, which we know is bone. In Chinese medicine, it's bone and brain, and there's stuff like that. But brain fog is another one of those things. Brain fog could be a lack of the kidney generating marrow. And then also remember the kidneys are really important to the growth, development, reproduction, and metabolism in the body. So um, I found this chart in a couple of websites that specialize in allergy treatments, and I just think it's a really good illustration of the way that your body accumulates stress and irritants. So I'd like you to keep it in mind when you're deciding, how you implement changes to improve your symptoms, because you're sitting there going, okay, that's great, Beth, the acupuncture herbs. I mean, I know you're an acupuncturist, but like, what does this mean for me? Right? It's great that you understand all of this, right? But what can I do to help my symptoms? And so I'm just going to lay it out for you, right? I'll break it down. First, pay attention to your food, right? I say read food labels. And no, I'm not going to suggest that everyone out there spend the rest of their life on the AIP diet. AIP stands for Autoimmune Protocol, and it can be really great at identifying food triggers, but it's just so difficult to sustain. And it's not always a great idea to start there because it's hard, and I just mean that, by this, I mean reading labels might be your new best medicine, because what it's going to do is it's really going to draw your awareness to the things that we know can cause harm to your spleen, right? And those things are sweets, cold food, raw food, dairy, wheat, and peanuts. And so, read your food labels, see, how many chemical toxin stressors you're adding into your diet. Are you reaching for the sugar more than you need to? What kind of sweetener are you using in your tea? Those kinds of things. So read your food labels. I don't even care if you change what you put in your body. I guarantee you, taking a moment to read the label is going to change your world, right? Number two, get out into your garden, right? And that's really about relaxation, right? If you have an autoimmune disorder, I guarantee you, your body is responding to stress. Now, maybe you used to be able to handle the adrenaline rush, but until you've got your until you've got your illness under control, you need to avoid them, right? Your adrenal glands are located directly above your kidneys. And I find that long-term exposure to stress hormones really wreaks havoc on your yin and your yang and your jing, which are all the domain of the TCM kidney. The other thing is getting your hands dirty is good for your spleen, right? We associate that with the earth element, and it just might improve your gut microbiome. There's a long time there where we talked about soil-based organisms as being, the gold standard of probiotic supplements, right? Go dig in the dirt. Don't wash your vegetables so much. It's fine, as long as they're organic. But if gardening's not your jam, that's fine. That's okay. But find a relaxation tool that works for you, because truly it's managing that stress is going to be a huge asset to you as you regain control of your health, if you're suffering with an autoimmune disease. What else helps your kidneys and your spleen? Sleep. Yes, sleep. I've got a whole course on sleep coming up later this year, so keep your eyes out for that. But if there is one thing you can start on with your journey to a better health, it is your sleep. In the meantime, pretend you're 2 years old again and take a nap. You'll thank me. Um, Last but not least, just buy organic. Like I'm so tired of like even debating about whether it's better or not. Like it's better than nothing, but like the more chemicals you can avoid, the better. Like we could talk about overspray, we can talk about like the preponderance of chemical, matter in our world on all varieties, but again, it's a little bit about harm reduction here. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you walk outside and you breathe the air and you're being assaulted. You eat food and you're being assaulted. This is about reduction, not about eradication, because that is not really even possible. So filter your water, buy organic fruits and veg, avoid synthetic fragrances or dyes, switch out your toxic cleaning products, get an air purifier in your home, or maybe just pick one of those to start with because, just pay attention to your stress above when I told you to get out into your garden because, yeah, like, don't stress. It's not worth it. But when you do start to pick out one of these things to add back into your life to see that if you can make a dent in your symptoms, I want you to keep the chart on your left in mind, because all of these things are things that affect your body's immune response, essentially, right? This is written by an allergy clinic, so we're talking about the allergic threshold, the threshold at which subjecting your body to certain triggers is going to actually instigate an immune response or an allergic response, right? And so, yes, it's a different reaction than necessarily an autoimmune reaction. The ones work, for like autoimmune diseases as you know them, but the chart stands, right? We have infectious stressors when we get sick. We have nutritional stressors when we eat foods that are difficult for our body to process. There are emotional stressors, right? Life is an emotional journey. We have lots of things that can cause us to feel sad, to feel way too happy, to feel angry, to feel afraid. We've got hormonal stressors. We're gonna, see back to the beginning when I was talking about how pregnancy and menopause really can affect how your body responds to its world. Chemical and toxic stressors, people who have multiple chemical sensitivities. I myself have a really difficult time with fragrances. They make me feel really bad really quickly. So I just don't have them in my house anymore. We have essential oils. Food allergens, inhalant allergens, right? Pet dander, mold, things like that, right? So think about that chart. And for those of you who've stuck around to the end, I got a little bonus. So, bonus tip. According to classical Chinese texts, one of the best things you can do for your immune health is to apply moxibustion to this point, this little orange point right here, every day. Now, moxibustion, or moxa for short, is dried Chinese mugwort, and it's particularly special because when it burns, it generates heat at a particular frequency that allows the heat to deeply penetrate the body. Now, I sell moxa sticks at my clinic, and most acupuncturists will have them available to you if it's an applicable treatment for your condition. So you can ask, right? And I will say that even participating in a few cycles of what's called new moon moxa, where you apply moxibustion to this point every day for the first 8 days of each new moon cycle, it's been really restorative to my own energy. So I will post some links to some other sites that have just more detailed information on how to apply the moxa. But this is definitely classical Chinese medicine, like at its purest. Moxa stomach 36 every day. You'll never be sick again. So they say. But it's certainly something you can do for yourself at home. And it's easy to find the tools that you need to do that. So that was my bonus for today. I hope you enjoyed today's talk about autoimmune disorders. I know that we didn't have time to delve deeply into specific disorders, but I hope that we were able to outline some of the broad strokes about the kinds of illnesses and how we view them in Chinese medicine and what you can do to support yourself on your healing journey. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. As always, you feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about Chinese medicine and helping you all feel more empowered about your own health and wellness. And if you like hearing what I have to say about such things, You can subscribe to our newsletter or our channel on YouTube and check back to our monthly talks. I give them every third Thursday. I know we pushed the schedule back this week because I wasn't feeling well last week, but usually they're every third Thursday, and we just talk about different health-related topics. And if there's a particular topic you'd like to hear more about, drop me a line, and we'll get it on the list. So thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed today's talk, and I will see you next month. Thanks so much. Bye.